This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. My name is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. It has been said humorously that the hyphen is silent and I am anything but. I am the author, the genesis, the owner, the manager, the operator of Respectonomics. Respectonomics is a hybrid expression. It combines respect and economics into one word. And before we go into that in great detail, I would like to explain the purpose of this introductory message and also to delineate what plans we have in the future. The first part is that this is introductory, and what it's designed to do is to explain two things really, the purpose and the business of Respectonomics, and then also to give you an idea of how this came into being. I think there's one thing that's more important though than just the introduction, and that is to thank you. To thank you personally for allowing me into your auditorium, your personal auditorium, whether it's the car, whether it's the kitchen, whether it's the deck, wherever you might be. And I want to emphasize that the person I'm talking to and sharing with is you. Archaically, we used to have those words. Do you remember thou and thee? This is a thou conversation. It is a conversation which means there are two parts to it. There's you and there's me. But the point here is to make sure that I'm speaking and sharing with you personally. Respectonomics is a hybrid expression. It's a joining up of two words, respect and economics. And the key behind economics is that it is the study or the activity of the exchange of goods and services. So, for example, if I go into the grocery store and buy a head of lettuce, I'm engaged in an economic transaction. They supplied the lettuce or the cabbage, whatever it is, and I paid for it. There is the transaction. It seems almost crude to think of respect in economic terminology. But let me run this by you. Economics is, as I say, the study of goods and services and how they are produced and how they are distributed. In order for that activity to take place, there has to be some medium of exchange. That's a heavy-duty way of saying you use your dollars in your pocket. And those dollars may, of course, be on your iPhone nowadays. They might be on a credit card. They might be transferred electronically. But there is a medium of exchange. We might refer to the Canadian dollar, the US dollar, the euro, the yuan, go around the world, and there are different currencies. The key behind the economic transaction is there is a currency. And in Respectonomics, there is a currency. And the currency is dignity. It's an extraordinary value attributable to dignity for two reasons. One is the wellspring, the production of dignity, is without limit. You can go on, and I can go on, we can go on, dignifying other people all the time. And the curious part about dignity as a currency is that the more you spend, the more it comes back, and the more it comes back, the more you spend. It's one of those almost contradictions to the theory of perpetual motion. It's accretive. It's what scientists have been trying to do with uranium to make sure it will produce more than it actually uses. Dignity is precisely that. So we're talking about returning, responding to the human being with dignity. Respectonomics has one, I would say, single purpose. And its purpose is to restore the dignity of the human being. Many of us are aware of how that dignity has been hijacked, marginalized, weakened, ignored. And there are so many cases, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's in the community, whether it's going to the theatre, whatever it is, how often you find your dignity has been basically ignored. So what we want to talk about is restoring the dignity of the human being. I actually have one issue with that expression, because really the truth is what we should be talking about is restoring the human being. The human being has many aspects, many attributes, and it's these attributes that need to be restored. We live in a world where the human being has been unitized. You might even say that's a play on words because it sounds like unicized. But it's also true to say that the human being has been, in the last 25 years, digitized, has been asked to perform on a uniform basis. Tremendous emphasis on we're all the same. You look at the word inclusiveness. Of course we want to include everybody in the party of life, but the truth of the matter is we are individuals. As a matter of fact, we are so individual that we claim, that each one of us is exclusive. The second part to Respectonomics is that the business is to honor other people's freedom of choice. In the talks that we're presenting now, you will see that we present ideas and philosophies. Truthfully, some of you will pick up on these, and you may reject them, you may admire them, you may aspire to them. The key is the freedom of choice to look at them and receive them accordingly. In Respectonomics, we have this combination of economics and respect. And respect is an interesting word because, in Latin, it comes from re and spicio. The spicio is the looking. The re has two different meanings. It can be a repetitive or it can be backwards, looking backwards. And when we look at respect of another human being, we in fact can look at it on the basis of looking back at that individual's life, or we can look at it and say, I want to do it again. The one thing I'm very clear on about respect is this. I came from a background where we were told to respect our elders and betters. Respectonomics asks us first and foremost to respect ourselves, because it is from the respect of self that I believe and we believe that you then create respect of another human being. It's far easier to be able to look at the wholeness of oneself and to translate that into the recognition of the extraordinary nature of not only humanity, but of course of the individual with whom you are communicating. My own career started some 51 years ago. That's what it says on my pension statement, that I was at for 51 years. I was with CIBC Woodgundy. I was engaged in what's commonly called the financial services industry. And in that breadth, I was involved in research and trading, investment banking, international wealth management, syndication, and did some training as well when I think of it. The point of the matter is, my background is, as you can tell, thoroughly corporate. And in that corporate world, I am aware, we are aware, of the many occasions in which our contributions did not receive that, what would you call it, appreciation and that acceptance. I have one example. In 51 years in my career, I don't know if this is a Guinness Book of Records, but I'll try it. In 51 years, I never received an unsolicited phone call from head office. By unsolicited, I mean not someone saying, did you happen to see that document? Did you put that prospectus in the mail? Did you trade those bonds or whatever? I'm talking about that call that comes in and says, how are you doing? How is your family? 51 years, no such call was might have been contemplated, it was never received. So what we want to talk about now is the fact that I've come into this world of Respectonomics, and I'd like to give you an introduction to how this happened. About 3 years ago, I received a phone call. It was during the pandemic. I received a phone call from the local radio station, and they wanted me to be, they'd had a cancellation, so the call came through on a Saturday, and they wanted me to be on air on the Monday. And I naturally agreed that to talk about economics and all those things. I was gainfully employed. Why wouldn't I want to show my wares to the public? And when I took the call, I had to take it from my office. And my office is called and in fact I have the website for it, it's called the Office in the Barn. My office is in the barn. It's a wonderful office. It includes a partner's desk, which dates from the 1850s. We used to be owned by the Mastering College at at Cambridge University, St. John's College. And I also have behind me the court cupboard, spelt C-O-R-T, and that dates from James I. And then on my desk I have the computer and the microphone and all my files. It's a wonderful location. You may wonder why I'm telling you that. There's a reason. One of the great advantages of Office in the Barn, it has a certain, mellifluous sound to it. But the reason I like the Office in the Barn is here I am engaged fully with you, talking about Respectonomics and its philosophies. And when I go out of the door, I am looking at the horses, literally. And I can smell the sawdust. Won't tell you what else I can smell, but I can see the feed. I can see all of the attributes of a horse barn. I'm in the real world. And it's a wonderful way to be able to connect from a place of consultancy, if you will, of thinking about these ways in which humanity operates, to be able to be in the natural world almost instantly. When I took that call, because during the pandemic I could not be in the studio at the radio station, and I was sitting in my office taking this call, and it went on for an hour. And I didn't realize that my wife was actually listening to the call. And I say that sort of rather strangely because if you think of it, if you're on the radio, you don't want to have another radio on because you'll get all the back feed. So anyway, I took the call, had the show, came out of my office door, and it turned out that my wife had been listening to it. And with a look of something between, I would say, contempt, anger, despair, frustration, elitism. I can't think of all the words that come together in one look. But whatever that combination might add up to, the comment that came back with, in fact, the use of the vernacular, which I will now avoid, to say, why don't you stop messing around and write a book? That afternoon I retired from CIBC Woodgundy and then started writing the book. And this is where I want you to follow me, please. I started writing the book, and as I was writing the book, which was actually I thought quite funny. It was called And, A-N-D, ... A-N-D, and ... The Conjunctions of Life. The first chapter was on manners. The second one was on earnings per share. And it was continued in that vein because it reflects the fact that in our daily life, we are occupied in so many different activities and functions. Anyway, started writing the book. And here was the thing that changed my world. And that is that as I started writing the book, and perhaps you've had this experience, as I started writing the book, I found the book was writing me. And this has created a part of Respectonomics that we will be talking about. This is an introduction, I've mentioned that already. The second series, the second episode, if you will, is going to be on the place of being fallow. Fallow is spelled F-A-L-L-O-W, fallow. It's an old-fashioned word. And the reason I bring that to the table is that when I was writing and the book started writing me, I in fact laid down my pen and pencil, laid down my brain, and went fallow. And going fallow is a wonderful, wonderful reward. It's a wonderful context for the human being. We're going to have an episode dealing with that. And then, as I came out of my fallow state, I started forming the ideas for Respectonomics. Now, in Respectonomics, I found one fundamental point that I'd like to make, and that is this. Peter Drucker, and some of you may be familiar with him, Peter Drucker was a management consultant and wrote extraordinary books on the concepts of management. I recall that he was at one point the chair of the Salvation Army, and the Salvation Army was regarded as one of the best-run corporations in the world. He positioned that every year, every business, regardless of size and shape and dimension, location and all that, should gather everybody together. And gathering everybody together means the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer, the chair of the board, the directors, and the individual who may be polishing the door handles, someone who might be sweeping in the evenings, someone, it sounds almost crude, but do you know in theaters, they often have someone late at night who goes around taking chewing gum from underneath the seats. But taking the whole compilation of the staff of that organization, you bring everybody together and you ask one question: what is our business? It's a profound question. The example that is given so often is the one of the two individuals who are welding. And there they are with their oxyacetylene lamps and all their big helmets and all that stuff. And as they weld away, you go up to one of them and you say, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm welding this line to this bracket in order to hold it to this particular board," or whatever. And that's fine, that's what he's doing. Then you say to the other one, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm building a railroad." Both answers totally correct, except the one that builds the railroad has a concept of responsibility, vision, and permeacity, that it's going to be something that is going to be very successful. I took that question, the question of what is our business, and went back one more stage. What is my business? As a human being, what is my business? I quickly formulated, as you can imagine, that my business is to honor other people's freedom of choice. But there's a bigger part to it, really, because in order, Peter Drucker would have said, you have to bring everybody to the table. And I have to bring every part of Jeremy to the table. My humanity consists, I am a tripartite being, and every single human being on this planet was, is, and will be, consists of three elements. And those elements are the body, we know that, the mind, and the soul. Those are the three parts to all of us. What fascinates me is I've talked to the equivalent, or the real, chief executive officers, people in commanding positions of influence and authority. And I find out something very interesting, that when I'm talking to these individuals, my opening gambit is, we are made up of body, mind, and soul. And I can almost guarantee you the initial response is, and you can almost hear it, the rolling eyes. The eyes that would say, "Yes, Jeremy, we don't really think about that. We don't really talk about those things." And then 30 seconds later, and maybe less, that same individual looks at me and goes, you know, you're right. So it's not exactly a revelation. And one of the things you'll find in Respectonomics is that we talk a lot of truths that are staring at us. My friend Bill Buxton, and you may want to look him up, he's absolutely brilliant. I believe I've got this right. He reported directly to Bill Gates. He's got 7 honorary degrees. And one of his comments to me once was, the art of making the obvious obvious before it becomes obvious. To me, it is very obvious that the human being consists of these 3 elements, components, these body, mind, and spirit. And each one needs to be given its due attention. Let me give you an analogy of what happens. You go into a bicycle store and you buy a bicycle and you get the most crazy bicycle you could imagine. It's got titanium written all over it, vanadium in it. It's got hydraulic brakes, GPS, sound systems, AI is built into the spokes. Who knows? It is unbelievable. And as you're leaving the bicycle store, you hear the salesperson saying, oh, by the way, you only get 2/3 of the chain. Take that picture for a second. You have this brilliant bicycle with 2/3 of the chain. You will sit on the bicycle and you will pedal furiously. Change gears, put on the brakes, do whatever you like. The bicycle will go nowhere. And not only will it not go anywhere, it's exhausting and the bicycle falls over and you go with it. And if you've got your feet clamped into the pedals, which they do with these modern shoes, you can really do yourself a number. So there is the risk. I mentioned this to a friend of mine. He's an investment banker. And he came off with another very interesting parallel. He said it's like buying the bicycle again, but he said it comes without the seat. And the reason that is interesting is, imagine being on a bicycle without a seat. You can bicycle, you can hold your balance, and you can go maybe 10 kilometers, go up hills, down hills, whatever. But you cannot rest, and eventually the process will collapse on you. I mention that because rest is one of the most important parts to the body and the mind and the spirit, or the soul. We need rest. Going back to this point, though, of the bicycle without the fullness of the chain, that is the way in which, in many parts of our lives, sometimes corporately, sometimes in the family, sometimes in the community, all kinds of organizations, we find that the body and the mind are considered, they are reflected. We even have human resource departments, don't we, that do things like, we're taking good care of you. I've never heard of a human resource department saying, and we're going to look after your soul. In fact, they would probably shun the very idea. But the truth of the matter is that unless those 3 are fully integrated, fully connected, allowed to operate in the way that we talk about inclusiveness, if we're going to talk inclusiveness, I'm going to put on the table body, mind, and soul. And when those 3 are operating correctly, when they are allowed to reflect one another, that is when that human being, whether it's you or me, that is when we can operate at the potential for which we were created. One of the biggest risks is that you look at somebody else's results, somebody else's creation, somebody else's potential. You look at somebody else. And how often do we find ourselves marking ourselves according to the other individual? He or she has got all these things and I want them too. I say, whoa. I say, why don't we look within ourselves at our body and our mind and our soul and see the extent to which they are being allowed to integrate and to work correctly with one another. And then I'm taking you now into the business world, and that has a certain risk because some of you will say, well, that's not really my world. But if you think about it, life is the business of life or the life of business. Take your pick. But we're in business, the business of life. And when our body and mind and soul are allowed to integrate properly, that is when we find that we get on best with other people. That is when my soul can reach to the other individual, my mind can be less cluttered, and my body can be more free to operate. It's an awareness issue, really. But as I become aware of these three, and as the organization around me respects those three, you want respect? I want the body and the mind and the soul to be respected. And as they become respected, then that integration that we've talked about within ourselves becomes the integration that is possible with others. And when we integrate successfully with others at the level of body, mind, and soul, that is when we find life at its most enjoyable, we find work is pleasurable, we find ourselves being more productive, more innovative, and perhaps as importantly as anything, we remove that ghastly umbrella of fear and anxiety which is so pandemic in many of our lives. So, bring the body, the mind, and the spirit to the table and ask the organization that they are going to respect and work with the very nature of what the human being is and what the human being is capable of being. I mentioned at the beginning that this is introductory. Really, it is what I've just said, introductory. There are many aspects to this that we would like to explore. The next episode is going to talk about fallow. The one after that is going to be giving us the ability to look at ourselves. And the last one is going to, or the fourth one, is going to be to look at how the self, the Jeremy, the Fred, the Sally, whoever you might be, that the you integrates with the other individual. I should have mentioned at the beginning a little bit about Jeremy. You know that I was with Woodgundy for 51 years. My voice will tell you a little bit. I was born in England and I was very well educated. I went to Eton, and I think when I got to Eton, Prince Berendra of Nepal was there. When I left, Prince Jakob of Ethiopia was there. And it's not really funny. It's not funny at all. Both of them were assassinated, which is a cruel truth to think of people with whom you shared your lives, shared some very personal parts, really, education, that's how it ended. I think most of us would agree that we want to be in a world where we find ourselves more agreeable and more harmonious with the others. After Eton, I came to Canada, I went to McGill, and subsequently went into the investment banking industry. I'm married and have been for some 46 years and have two daughters. Both of them are married. One of them has a son, my grandson, our grandson, and he is obviously not spoilt and is obviously not the apple of our eye. This business of respectonomics, I believe, is extraordinarily important. The world has moved into this place of distrust, of fear, of hopelessness, of anger and contempt. Whenever I'm talking to people in the service industries, in other words, that individual that's behind the counter at the hamburger store, time and time again what I hear is the foul and contemptuous way in which they are treated. It was my mother once who said, "This cannot go on." And she's right. I could also remind you of the Prince of Wales. This was back in 1926, when there were appalling labour issues going on and coal mines were being closed and so on. This is the Prince of Wales who subsequently became Edward VIII. And he was touring the mines and saw all the miners out of work. And obviously looking disheveled, depressed. Everything was wrong with that picture. And one of his great lines was, "Something must be done." I agree. something must be done. And I believe that Respectonomics is one of the, not the only, one of the keys to bringing back the incredible strength, the inclusiveness, the exclusiveness, the integrity, the everything of the human being. I want to give you one last comment. I have come to all of these conclusions and ideas. I should call them conclusions because there is no conclusion. I've come to all of this through a breadth of people. I call them the Dignity Trust. Can you imagine? There's 14 or 15 of us that share ideas, exchange ideas on a continuing basis. Continuing basis means any day, any hour. Sometimes people will say, can't talk now. But we are all engaged in one thing and just talking about how these things can happen and the parts that come with them. What fascinated me was, as I looked through the list of these 14, 15 people, first of all, they don't really know each other. I'm the only one who knows them all. But the other thing is, I looked at their sphere of influence, their sphere of work and interests. It's incredible. The gamut runs from investment banking through to one individual who's been a diplomat, who also, I might add, is probably one of the world's leading authorities on Gilbert and Sullivan and Wagner. I talked to a fellow on the East Coast who was in charge of training at one of the largest organizations in North America, and on top of that is now actively engaged in investment management. I talked to a retired lawyer. His wife has written books on women's rights, women's position in society. She is a lawyer, and she is actually has been the dean of her law school. I talked to a broadcaster. He's been at it for 50 years, broadcasting, knows all about reaching people. And he is the one who said to me, make sure that when you're talking, Jeremy, you are talking to the individual. This is not a collective you all. This is the individual to you. I speak with you and I share with you, and I do so from my heart. And I trust that this series with Respectonomics will continue to grow and develop and take an important role in our lives, in both business, well, I shouldn't say both, but in business and in community and family, all kinds of organizations. Let's give the human being their full go that they are entitled to. I rest my case.